put one area.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at our February 18th meeting of the Hyde Park Planning Board. Please take note of exits around the room. In case of mishap, and join me as we salute the American flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First, let me thank my colleagues for making the meeting that I missed last week and for setting a record and getting it opened, closed, and all the business done in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Congratulations.
It was a pleasure.
The first item on the agenda will be to approve minutes from that meeting of February 4th. May I get a motion to do so?
So moved. Second.
Everyone had a chance to read them, I assume?
Yep.
And Mr. Signa and I are recused because we were not here. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? The motion carries unanimously. Next on the agenda is to consider a sign permit recommendation for a freestanding sign at 813 to 817 Ballard Avenue for what is known as Tina's Territory. It's a collection of tenants under one location. The site owner is here. Do you want to come up and speak for any reason, Mr. Lombardi?
Basically, what we're trying to do is upgrade the sign evidently, and I guess there's a new sign ordinance that's in effect, and basically going to try to be in compliance to meet that.
Actually, it's a nice-looking sign, and it's a good tenant sign, because now instead of people having to look back on each of the each tenant's wall, they can now see it in a directory sign. So I think it's going to look really good and tie in your site.
Yep.
Any comments from the board? Any questions from the board? Who has this resolution?
I do. Resolution recommendation for issuance of sign permit pursuant to Town Code Section 108-24.3A4D. February 18th, Resolution 15-1. Whereas the applicant, whereas, be it resolved, the board hereby recommends the sign permit be issued within 10 days of this resolution.
Any further discussion? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you for coming out, sir.
Thank you.
And we can't wait to see the sign up. The next item on the agenda is a request for a site plan waiver for a pool and associated improvements with the pool. It's for the new property owners, last name Frank, at 58 River Road. We have a waiver recommendation from the zoning administrator. In addition, being a neighbor, I want to point out that the pool has been there since before I moved to Hyde Park 21 years ago. And apparently it's so that there can be a properly done fence to bring up to code, because the fence that surrounds it now is not up to code. It's not narrow enough. The site is visible from the river, but the fence is going to be very similar to what's there right now. It's metal, just be a little bit narrower. And otherwise, there'll be no difference to the site itself. Any further discussion? Who has this resolution?
Yeah, I do. Site plan waiver, February 18, 2015, resolution number 15-2, whereas an application requesting a waiver of site plan has been made to the Town of Hyde Park Planning Board by Robert Frank on January 23, 2015, for property located at 55 River Road in the Town of Hyde Park, and now therefore, now therefore be it resolved that the Town of Hyde Park Planning Board hereby waives site plan requirements for the file entitled Frank regarding the specific request as received January 23, 2015, and in the building permit application file for this project. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Now, some quick discussion on a proposed local law amending section 108-2.47, establishing when non-conforming signs must come into conformance. Sometimes we have the resolution that accompanies the change in law, which would sort of give us an idea as to why they're proposing this, but this is not from the town board. Nonetheless, we do have Councilman David Ray here, so if any of you have questions of him, this is a town board member who can answer them.
Yay.
But the law itself, basically, when all our new code was adopted back in 2005, the owners of signs that were not in conformance were given to a period of 10 years in which to what is called amortize these signs. And by that, the amortization would be if you were putting money aside a little bit every 10 years, you'd have enough to put up a new sign. And also, if you were depreciating your old one that you paid for, then it would be fully depreciated under IRS law. This was examined both by engineers as to life of signs, I'm told, as well as by the attorneys in terms of case law. What the new town board is now proposing to do is, instead of all signs having to come into conformance as of June of this year, because it's been 10 years, and as Mr. Murphy and I were just saying, we can't believe we've been on the board that long, along with Ann, because I just can't believe it. It has been, and so what they're proposing to do is to extend the time period of 2 more years before anything would have to be done in terms of most of the town changing signs. Now, when I say most, that's probably not quite accurate. I'm not really sure how many businesses there are. I tried looking it up on the chamber website, but that's, of course, just members of the chamber. But Ms. Moss circulated a figure to us that there were approximately 65 illegal signs and 80 non-conforming signs that this would be applying to. Now, the illegal signs could be signs that we're never going to come into conformance because they're just illegal. And by that I mean you're allowed 1 neon sign in a window, and there's several establishments that have up to 5, so those are just not allowed. And then some of them could be illegal because they were put up and never recommended for a permit by this board. The rest that are non-conforming are typically ones that are older. For example, all the signs that are internally lit would be now non-conforming as of June of this year. That would include things as random as, say, Coppola's Italian-American Eatery, to Ever Ready Diner, to the CAAR repair shop over on 9G. There are less and less internally lit signs, but we still have them. The Quality Inn sign, the big Q, unless it has a variance, which I don't think it does, that would no longer be in conformance. Roosevelt Inn, which is neon and large, would no longer be in conformance. Just for the record, I want to point out to the board that when Mr. Murphy and a group of us from this board, as well as our consultant and some professional sign makers, when we changed the sign code the first time about 5 years ago, one of the things we added in was a way in which owners of certain signs that we considered to have historical merit could come to the planning board and get a special use permit. Now, this is not a variance, but, and while I shouldn't say specific signs we were thinking of, I think the way to explain it better would be to say, for example, we were looking at Ever Ready thinking, the Ever Ready sign is way too big to conform, it's internally lit, all of that. But it fits that kind of 50s diner style that it matches. Similarly, say the Roosevelt Inn sign, if we're supposed to be an historical community and that big Roosevelt Inn sign looks pretty much like the signs that existed back in the 50s and 40s when kinds of motor inns were going up like that, to make it come into conformance, you'd lose some of your historical value. So we were thinking about signs, like I said, specifically that either the design criteria would be so compelling that it deserved a special use permit, or it contributed to the historical aspects of our community. Now, some other signs I've mentioned, like the car shop that's fairly new, that probably wouldn't qualify for either. But owners are allowed to come in for either to seek variances, like for an internally lit sign, although I think that'd be rare to get because it's a use variance, or they could come to us for a special use permit. So there already exists mechanisms, in other words, for property owners to attempt to keep signs without having to come into conformance. So the question before us tonight would be kind of a three-way path as I see it. Either we can send a letter back recommending that they do not adopt this language and keep the code as is so that everyone is treated comparatively or equally. They'll have to come into conformance after this 10-year period. We could recommend that they adopt this and add so that there's a 12-year time period, or we could take a third path, in my opinion, and say there's maybe an alternate that you might want to consider. I'll bring that up when I discuss this further. So given all that, let me start down to my left with Mr. Signa. Any
Yes.
comments?
I find it very difficult to address this issue because apparently it's a town code issue and established by the town board, not by the planning board. So some of the remarks I make may be out of context, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think when you establish a time frame for regulations such as code, people work towards them. I know this board has worked using them, and I know there have been applicants who have been who have adjusted their plans based on that town code. And some of them, or at least I remember one specifically, Dollar General saying, well, all the signs are not in conformance anyway, and we had a discussion that they will be in conformance. And as a result, I find that that will weaken any possible adherence to code in the future, because some applicants will feel you don't really you don't really put into play what you have. And I think that that is a very dangerous precedent. I think one of the things that could happen, since it appears from the reasoning given why they're looking to extend it, something having to do with weak economic times, there may be applicants out there who are experiencing severe economic hardship. Perhaps they could consider that someone who does not meet the code in due time will submit a plan as to that would indicate, one, why they haven't, and two, their plan for meeting in the future, and be in effect put on a form of probation, so that you're assured that they have made some step towards a resolution, rather than just leaving it out there of, well, 2 more years, and then 2 years from now, the next board will say, well, 2 more years, and it will not address the issue. I'm going to leave the rest of the comments to my colleagues, because...
Actually, if I can just summarize that, I think those are all excellent points. One, a time frame was established, and both we and certain applicants, a good example would be Mr. Lombardi, who said he just came in because he was coming into conformance, because his signs have been out of conformance, they're too tall, et cetera. That's a good point. Also, the worry about the future when we tell new applicants who say want different kinds of signs. I think Dollar General, they want it internally lit, and we say no, all signs are going to have to come into conformance. We worry that they'll keep kind of barking up the wrong tree and battling. None of us want to do that. And then also, if they can show economic hardship, while that can't go into our consideration,
Correct.
it could go into through enforcement, because ultimately it's the town board that decides to enforce. So they could say, as long as there's a plan. Okay, those are all good points. Mr. Murphy?
I can't state in the strongest way how I think that we should not have this law. Everybody that's come here and done it the right way has come in front of us, and a lot of them have said, gee, the guy down the street's in the same business we are. He's got a huge sign, and it flashes and turns somersaults, and why are you making me do this? And we told each one of them that this will be the date when he has to conform. These are the people that I think we ought to be looking at, not the people who, after 3,000 days, don't know that they're going to be, where they're going to get the money for the new sign. We owe it to the people who did this the right way to address these inequities that we promised them we would as a town. These inequities in these signs, we promised them we'd address them. And I think for us to take any step in the direction of saying to people, well, we didn't really mean it, I think we're addressing the wrong group here. We need to address the people that did it the right way, spent money on their signs, that were smaller, they weren't internally lit, they made the town look better. And now we're going the other direction, and I would be my motion that the chairman send them, the town board a letter saying that we think this is a terrible mistake.
That was a well-argued viewpoint, and I think if I can summarize it, you were basically saying that sometimes being business-friendly also means supporting those who've done it the right way, not just saying, oh, we're going to take care of those who say they can't afford it. That's a very good point. Ms. Dexter?
I think my colleagues to the left have brought up excellent points, and I agree wholeheartedly with what they've just said. I think my only, I don't know the motivation for this, so I'm not quite sure, if there's something underlying that we're not aware of. But I have been sitting on this board for 10 years and have told many applicants that this was, they had 10 years, and I think the people that we're talking about who have not come into conformance aren't people who just set up shop, because we've been very diligent that anybody who has just set up shop and has come before us have been in conformance. So I think my questions are, if we leave it at 10 years, what did the town code say would happen to people who continue to be out of conformance and/or illegal. Sometimes they're kind of both. I'm not sure, I'm not sure if the law covered that portion of it. It was very clear about the 10 years. But again, we just had someone before us who took the law seriously and spent their money. And I do understand that we are in hard times, but you know what? 10 years ago, we weren't. So, you know, we don't change laws just because, you know, some people may have a hard time. I think what we need to do is work with people who have economic issues. We need to work with them another way. I think you just mentioned there's special use permits, there's variances, there are ways that sign owners can come into conformance. I'd rather deal with any one-offs than make a blanket 2-year extension at this point.
I should have added that in the resolution and the change of the law, it does talk about just improving the economic vitality, but it doesn't go into any further depth, just to give it by 2 years.
You know, again, we have all kinds of new businesses coming in, and they've really done a great job, and I think to extend this just extends things that don't look well, you know? I mean, that's what they need to deal with, is what do you do with the people who have not come into conformance? I don't think you reward them by giving them another 2 years.
And the 10-year period was, just for background for everybody, it's in the code, well marked. I think a lot of existing businesses probably don't read the code. We have new applicants who don't always read the code. But having said that, approximately 5 years ago, Ms. Moss, Stan Frank, who's the vice chair, then vice chair and still vice chair of the ZBA, and I made a presentation to the chamber where we discussed specifically the amortization period for signs. And this is, to the best of my memory, the person who kind of squawked the loudest was Levi Wallace, because he said he wanted to keep his internally lit sign. And if you'll recall, Mr. Wallace came before us last year and brought all his signs into conformance.
And they look great.
And I've spoken to him, and he said he actually prefers the signs now, that we were right. He said people, when they come to see him, tell him that they can see this location now better because it was so high up. It was kind of obscured by some of the electrical wires that are going into the Hyde Park Library, that now people can see his shop better. So this just kind of argues the same point. Mr. Oliver.
I'd have to agree with all my colleagues here. I think, you know, they've done a great job explaining, you know, the reasons we can't do this. And I think just to, you know, add a few more points to that, one being a new sign may breathe, you know, new life into an old business. You know, it might attract people who have never noticed it, or just, you know, it just pulls attention to it. Even if they have no intention of shopping there, it's, oh, hey, there's a new sign, and then that business is now recognized again. I think in going back to the code and what it's established to do, and from our perspective here, with this sign code and the design unity, you know, we're trying to create a sense of place. And if we can't get into that, you know, what's the point of having a code? And then it goes 2 years, and then 2 more years, and it's just, I think, extremely important that we, you know, stick to the laws that we've created here, and, you know, really stand up for our community and all the businesses that have supported this, you know, since I've been on the board for the last 3 years. Thank you.
Well argued as well, and I don't really to summarize that. I think that your two big, in addition to agreeing, your two biggest points were sometimes a new sign can breathe new life into an old business. People could see it again when they've just been taking everything for granted, and that you're right, both in our comprehensive plan as well as our code throughout, we use terminology like creating a sense of place, trying to get Hyde Park to be identified as Hyde Park. I know all of us up here over the years who've worked hard with the architects who come before us to see if we can't find architecture that reflects that sense of place well, you know, through our most significant buildings, et cetera. So those are all good points as well. Mr. Marcigliano.
I guess I'm not aware of the background here. Is the 10-year period expiring? Is that
June
what's
of this
happening?
year.
Okay, so I didn't realize that. So the point here is, are we going to extend, for people that haven't come into conformance, are we going to extend it 2 years? And everyone seems to be against it. And that seems to me, I take all the points. Why extend it? It's been 10 years. What's 2 years going to do? Might as well just draw the line.
Okay, we're in complete concurrence, I see. I was going to offer a sort of a third suggestion. I'm just going to say anyway, but I don't think we need it. My worry was that in every 2 years, we'd be doing the same thing. Because I think it's really hard for someone to say, now's the exact right time to say they have to all come into conformance. I was going to suggest we just say, have no amortization time frame, and that way, so that when any sign came in for a change, that then it would have to come into complete conformance. Right now, the code is written so that if you make changes, it doesn't have to come into complete conformance, it just has to come into more conformity. But everything still had to at the end of June 2015, so even those, any change from now on would affect that. But I don't think that there's a reason to really wait all that time. And we have, as I said, we already have mechanisms for, if people think my sign needs to stay because it's historical or it adds something, they can come to the boards now. For sign permits, we don't require escrow. It's just the $50 permit. That's all they'd have to argue. And I don't think that's too burdensome for people who want to keep their signs. And it's going to put us in the hot seat in several cases to say, no, you're going to have to change it. But that's also why we're up there, put the way we're put in staggered 7-year terms, because we can't be voted out of office, so to speak. We're supposed to follow the law. So I'm going to concur with all of you guys, and what I'll do is have a letter written up shortly and send it out, and we can vote to adopt. I believe we still have, for our next meeting is still within the 3-day time frame.
It's the 28th, I think, February.
I
What day-
thought
what day did
they
we
said they
rec-
wanted to vote on this on the 23rd? Was that, did I read that right?
Either the
The
23rd
next
or
meeting is March 4th and March
Yeah.
18th.
Well, they have a public hearing that starts on the 23rd, but we didn't receive this until the 13th, and we are allowed 30 days in which to respond.
We don't need that much.
So if you, well, should I just get a motion?
Can I make a motion that we authorize the chair to summarize our points into a letter
I'll second
and
that
forward it
motion.
to the town
You can
board?
end the letter, pull the trigger.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, well, that way we don't have to wait for the next meeting. I can go ahead and get it out to them, but I will send it off to everybody just for your review. And it's always nice to have someone help me edit for mistakes. I'm looking right down at Ed because he always looks very carefully and notices that I am going through so fast sometimes I misspell it or put in the wrong comma. So thank you then. Anything else on the, any other business? Motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Second.
It's a long meeting.
All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Aye.
Thank you, Media Committee, for covering this. And I guess you got an earful, Councilman.
Yeah, I thought I was going to say a few words, but it's 6 against 1. 6 against 1.